Correspondent for us, of course. Now joining me is former Ambassador Nicholas Burns, veteran U.S. diplomat and professor at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Ambassador Burns, obvious segue here to how did the Obama administration do diplomatically? Did they strike just the right turn? Were they a little late to the party? Or in the end, were they critical in toppling Mubarak?
Oh, I think the strategy of the Obama administration was vindicated today by this result. I mean, President Obama from the start had to do two things well, and I think he did them well. First, he had to identify with the people protesting peacefully and support them. And beginning on January 28th, 2 weeks ago tonight, he did that. Secondly, he had to use the considerable influence of the United States behind the scenes with the military, with Mubarak, with Omar Suleiman, to encourage them to move forward and eventually for Mubarak to move out. That was a juggling act that you saw the president engaged in. It was the right use of American power. It was classic diplomacy, public statements, behind the scenes. I think the president did very well. And I never agreed throughout this crisis with the criticism. He was being too soft on Mubarak. He should call for his ouster. He's being too tough on Mubarak. He should protect the regime. I thought he played it right down the middle between those two poles. And frankly, you know, I know there's criticism that the administration had to try to keep up with events. We all did. Those of us who teach at universities, the press, we were all keeping up with rapidly changing events, and I give the administration very high marks for representing our country, I think, very effectively.
Ambassador Burns, you know, the criticism on keeping up I always found to be absurd. Like you said, we're all trying to keep up here, but I got to admit, I was one of the critics who said he was moving too slowly. But what matters is the conclusion, and in the conclusion, at the end, he seemed to have not only come to the right place, but again, just looking at it from the outside, and you tell me if it's any different, it looked like after he came out really strong last night, boom, we finally have results tonight. I'm just trying to determine how much of a difference that made.
Well, you know, I think that the president also said something very important at the beginning of the crisis. My words, not his, because I can't remember exactly what he said, but it's not about us. This is an Egyptian drama. They will be the authors of this. He said this repeatedly. And so he recognized that despite the real influence of the United States in Egypt, and we're by far the most influential foreign country, we weren't going to be the authors of this result. It was going to be the Egyptian people, the people power of those hundreds of thousands of young people in the streets of Cairo and Alexandria and Suez over the last 18 days. It was inspiring. And I think that by identifying with them, we've set ourselves up, hopefully, to help in this transition. But by using our influence with the military and with Mubarak and Suleiman, we practice the kind of diplomacy that is most often effective. You know, if the president had come out at the very beginning of the crisis, and if he had publicly called for Mubarak's ouster and given all sorts of directions as to what should happen, I think that would have backfired. I think that a lot of Egyptians would have been upset with that kind of blatant interference in their political process. I do think the balance was met by the president, but I also think that now it gets really difficult because the transition begins tomorrow, and it's likely to be very complex and turbulent.